in many of the most lucrative, I mean, look at the oil agreements that they have. Despite the fact that we have, in America, many of the largest oil reserves out of anywhere, but we have a very strong trading relationship with all of the oil-producing nations. So, for example, if we didn't have this, but we had an even more exemplary educational system, I doubt that we would see the type of job growth if we didn't have the proper energy to support that. As an example. And so, while, as I said, while education is a very integral part of it, there are other considerations as well.
So what is it that distinguishes the U.S. educational system in general?
No, well, it's a very complex system, and I think that people looking from the outside in don't really know how complex it is. What they see is the result of many centuries of reform after reform, many of them failed reforms. Many of them that we are still tweaking today, because it can never stop, for one. It's always ongoing, but number two, we try things, we fail at it, and then we try to reform it, we try to make it better. So, and I will say something else, comparisons in general are not useful, so a lot of times people will come and in order to push the educational system in America in a certain way, one way or another, they'll compare the American system to India or to China or to some other system. While all Americans, for example, are being considered against only a subset of the Chinese or against the Indians or against another country. And so, but whereas if you would compare the entire system of America to all, you know, children who are the age of students in, say, China, then you wouldn't see similar comparisons, right? You wouldn't see similar numbers. But since all Americans are compared to only those Chinese who are in school or only the Chinese in certain schools, then it seems as though China might be excelling more than America in one area or the next. So that's why it's really not, and people test their children very differently. So the comparisons are not useful, nor are they really fair or accurate.
Right. So how must educational reforms interact with other tools of reform? First of all, what are these other tools, and then how should the reaction take place?
So many of the arguments in America are articulated around how schools might make jobs increase, better jobs, better paying jobs, and more overly that the people who are educated well in schools will be good workers, right? And education is said to be partly responsible, if not largely responsible, for the societal's ill. So if there's violence in an area, if there are drugs in an area, if there's joblessness, obesity, or other health problems, all of these things are often incorrectly associated with education, right? So what we say, we researchers of education say, look, we want to address joblessness or crime, okay, for example, or low productivity at work. We want to address this, but we also have to address some of the societal things that have nothing to do with school. For example, if a particular community is heavy in violence and there's heavy drug use, then you're ignoring that from the equation of the crime being related exclusively to schools. So you have to consider drugs, and so if there are a lot of, for example, parents in a particular community who have drug problems, then you have to address that as well, or who don't have jobs. Right? You have to address that as well, because that is, you have to address the school system itself, but you have to find jobs for parents, or get them treatment programs, or get them other programs, or other things that are needed in the neighborhoods that surround schools, along with, right, the educational reforms that you do in the schools. And it's actually really unfortunate, because in many of the countries I visited, in addition to my own country of America, I noticed that a lot of people believe that societies and education can be reformed only from within inside of the schools, right? And that's really misleading. And it's an incorrect way to think about it.
How do you see schools in general in the Muslim countries? I mean, most of the Muslim nations, the overwhelming majority of them are developing nations. Many of them are suffering economically, and hence this reflects into perhaps not a very advanced educational system. But at the same time, they might have other tools that could help in societal reform, including the community or the family and so on. But the question here is, First of all, how do you see the educational systems? How should they be improved in Muslim countries? And does this give the fact that they are not very advanced educational systems, does it give more weight and more to the community and family role in reform and heavier responsibilities? Difficult tasks, really?
Yes, yes. It's a very interesting question. I've thus far visited perhaps 11 or 12 Muslim countries, something like that. And I have not seen in my travels motivated people than I see in many of the Muslim countries I visited. People who are willing to go the distance, who are willing to go, who are committed to really furthering their own knowledge base. Here's where I see the challenge. It seems as though many of the Muslim educational specialists that I encounter would like to reform their schools, which is also good. Yet the reforms that they want to implement are taken directly from the West, who have been trying to reform their countries for 200, 300, 400 years. So there are very specific cultural and historical reasons why we test our students in America, for example. So first of all, if you don't understand why we test our students, and then you're bringing a technology that we've developed specifically for us and trying to implement it in another country, it's problematic. Okay, you're not using it as we use it. You don't know why we developed it. But because you see our economy, you make assumptions about our schools, as we just talked about. And then you say, oh, this is why their schools are good. Let's bring that technology here, right? Like the whiteboard. When I was traveling recently in a country, and a lot of people were very excited about the whiteboards and iPads. Yeah. Yet what they were doing with them, they weren't using these technologies. And testing is the biggest one, obviously. Standardized testing to try to test to find out where your students stand. All of these technologies, if you're not using them to increase and to improve learning, really they're wasted technologies. It's just waste of money.
Important point there. Dr. Khalifa, dear brothers and sisters, allow us to take a break here. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the role of education, family and communities in societal reform. Please do stay with us. We'll be back momentarily, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
You are never alone. You are never alone.
At the time of Nuh, peace be upon him, the floods swept the entire earth, sparing only those who believed. Today, floods of shirk, floods of innovation, and floods of desires and lust are sweeping the whole earth. Al-Imam Malik ibn Anas of Medina said that the Sunnah is the Ark of Nuh. Whoever boards it is saved, and whoever refuses is drowned and is doomed forever. Join me in Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, the 40 hadith compiled by Al-Imam al-Nawawi.
Join Asim al-Hakim in Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya every Sunday, Tuesday and Thursday at 11 p.m. and repeat telecast at 12:30 p.m. India on Peace TV.
The more you hear about it, the more you desire to prepare for it. Life after death. Journey of the soul. The day of resurrection. The torment of the hellfire. The reward of paradise. Stay tuned for a life-changing, heart-softening, spiritually uplifting series about the hereafter exclusively on Peace TV.
Know the vivid descriptions of paradise and hellfire from the Quran and authentic ahadith and acquire life-changing habits to be successful in the hereafter. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m. and repeat telecast at 5:30 a.m. India on Peace TV.
You are never alone. You are never alone.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back. Dr. Khalifa, so I guess an important question here is how reforms should be measured. I mean, this is also a very difficult and perhaps relative question, but how testing, for instance, testing differs from one educational method to another, and reforms in general, how can they be, grasped, measured accurately, if they can ever be?
Yeah. So whenever reform is sort of articulated or invented or crafted or developed, it should definitely come along with measures that are sustained over a very specific period of time. This is what we would look at in 6 months. This is what we would look at in 12 months. It should be known that reforms don't happen overnight. They take time, right? So some people would like to implement a reform and within 12 months see tremendous success. It doesn't happen that way. Reforms take time. You asked specifically, however, about testing. And this is often testing of students. So if you want to reform something in your school, in a year from now, the students should learn differently. Okay? It takes a long time to trickle down, but I want to say that this, in and of itself, is not the exclusive or even the most effective way that we should measure reforms, that we should test reforms, and it is the most likely method used. Testing students to see how well a reform has done. It's terribly ineffective. It is often misleading, and it's hurtful to people in the process, teachers who their students don't perform well, for example. So what I'm going to argue here, Muhammad, is that we, as people in the world, all of us, have to develop culturally specific and culturally relevant and country-specific ways of measuring success. What we use in America is not going to work in Russia, nor Egypt, nor Saudi Arabia, nor India. And what they use in India, I can't bring to Michigan, and I'm not going to find it very useful. Okay? Perhaps some form of testing should be a part of it. But there are all these other measures that have to accompany these tests that really let us know really how long this reform is going to take, really if it is effective, and that this will tell me, and specifically and only me, that this is what we need to continue doing or not doing. And what I've often seen is people coming to America paying tremendous amounts of money to testing consultants, testing companies, having them come implement a test. And I've seen this in many countries. The only information that's yielded from that is, well, these are the top 10 students in this school. They deserve a scholarship. And these are the top 10 students in this school, and they deserve a scholarship. It's a huge waste of resources.
We talked about the role of education. Surely we'll stay with it as we talk about other factors in reform. I think an all-important factor will be the family, the parents. If we want to see our kids better than us, then other than sending them to what is perceived as a good school, and other than defining the goals we want them to achieve from education, not just the economic goals as you mentioned, what is it that we should do, and how will the interaction work between the role of family and role of school when it comes to reform?
Yeah. As I answer this question, I reflect on a piece of research I recently had published in the States, where in the South, as you know, the history around African Americans, I'm an African American, the history around African Americans in the South are that one congressman commented that African American schools in the South, this is back in the early 1900s, are so bad that when you go into the school, you have a science lesson. You can look up and see the stars, and you can look down and see the earth, because there were no floors and there was no ceiling, right? So despite this, though, the parents worked with the schools. Almost, you could go into a building, you could not tell the difference between who was the
parent and who's the teacher.
And who was the teacher. And sometimes the parent was the teacher, because the teacher wasn't there. So these strong bonds and relationships, despite African Americans in the South not having hardly any resources, led to some of the best minds, mathematicians, like Dr. Shabazz, who is one of the #1 mathematicians in the United States of America. Some of the astronauts, some of the people who work in the federal government as all lawyers. Thurgood Marshall, for example, who was a Supreme Court justice, went to these segregated black schools, right? What was the missing ingredient that they had then that we don't have now? You can take this not only to modern day America, but modern day anywhere. There is a perception that parents can come at 7:30 in the morning, drop their children off at school, come at 3:30, pick them up. If they have a problem, yell at the teacher, or if they have a problem, go and use some nepotism with the principal. You know, we've been here, you know, I know such and such, I need this for my kid. And at the end of the day, however, that's not truly a collaborative working relationship, right? That is something that I see severely missing in almost every Muslim country and in the United States of America in many places. And it's a very huge missing component that's needed.
Right. And there must be a role for the family at home, naturally, when it comes to a reform in society.
Sure.
Not just as an interaction with schools, but at home, teaching perhaps the kids the moral values they own, and make them inherit their traditions, their cultures, and that would be another form of education that would lead to reform. So there's education at home as well, right? Education, not just from the curriculum, but education by from parents to kids.
Yeah, absolutely, there is. I always caution. What I'm not doing, let me clearly define it. What I'm not doing is I'm not putting the onus completely on parents, right? The unit of analysis, in other words, the people we hold accountable are people in the schools. Let me be very clear about that. However, what I'm also saying is that they can't do it alone. They need the help of this crucial stakeholder, the parent, and the community people. There should be an overlapping existence. In other words, you should see parents frequently in the school. You should see school staff frequently in the homes. You should see people working as a team, not against each other, not confrontationally. And yes, parents need to parent.
Yeah, exactly. So from where did the disconnect between families and schools emerge? I mean, why did this happen?
Yeah.
Why is it, as you mentioned, that it seems many parents believe that their role is just to drop their kids at 7:30 and pick them up at 3:30 and yell at teachers whenever there is a problem?
Or when their children don't perform as well as they think, right?
Right.
So there are a number of possible explanations of this, but I would like to keep it very practical. I will say that as the rule of law strengthens, generally speaking, social bonds diminish. So the stronger role that a school plays, then the more parents say, okay, they're doing it. But I've gone to some very tribal societies, working with principals and parents and teachers there. And the northern people, thankfully, have really tried to structure government and have tried to structure schools. And some of them are doing a fabulous job at that. But they don't have a strong government structure. So the social bonds, the bonds, I mean, the amount of times that a teacher might just drive to a student's house and pick them up, or go there to talk with them and have dinner with that family, and vice versa. come into the school and just stay there. Why is this parent here? Oh, they're just here. You know. So these social bonds are much stronger there, and that gives a much more wholesome relationship to the student. Can you imagine if the student might see their mother there any day? I mean, that they believe that their parent really is involved and really care about their education, how that might play into the psychological learning process of that student. And it's tremendous. And so while they have a whole nother set of challenges, I think that we can learn from that. We can learn from historical models that I talked about in early America. And we could use some of that now, right? While at the same time maintain these very high standards, what we expect from teachers and principals.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Khalifa, Professor of Educational Administration, Michigan State University, USA. It's been a pleasure. Jazakumullahu khairan. And hope to see you again soon.
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalifa. Dear brothers and sisters, we hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have here. And please do join us again until we meet again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You are never alone. You are never alone. Through sorrow and through grief, through happiness and peace, you are never alone. So now, as you long for your past, prepare for your future, but knowing nothing's gonna last. You see, this life is but a road, a straight and narrow path to our final abode. So travel well, O Muslim, and paradise will be your home. And always remember that you are never alone.
Images and depictions of our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa